Welcome to Keeping the World Company on Think Tech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today, we'll talk about the role of fear in moving to fascism. How much of that is happening today? Our co-host for the show is Tim Apicella. Our guests for the show are Jean Rosenfeld, independent scholar, and Manfred Henningsen, emeritus professor of political philosophy at UH Manoa. Welcome to you all to the show. Of course, the thing we have to fear is fear itself. But what was FDR referring to? Was he really talking about the use of fear by fascists in the country? We can't let that happen again. So let's begin with you, Tim. I have many questions about this, and you can help me ask other questions. First question, looking at the country in general, are we afraid? Is the phenomenon of fear taking hold of America?
Well, I'll cite some areas where I think we can draw some distinct examples, and I'll look first to the media. I'll look at Jeff Bezos, his refusal to allow the Washington Post to endorse a candidate before the election. We'll look at Jim Acosta from CNN, who was being placed on the midnight hour, no man's land in media, and basically shuttled away so that his criticism of Donald Trump and the past policies and future policies of Donald Trump could not be heard at a normal, decent time. We have intimidation of other media outlets. When Donald Trump was a candidate, said that he's going to contact the FCC and pull ABC's broadcasting license, or go after those individuals of MSNBC. We have examples of how the Department of Justice is rolling over and bending the knee for Donald Trump. So we don't have overt fear. I call this through Donald Trump's stochastic language, he's implying the threat of retaliation. And that is instilling fear in agencies, heads of agencies, members of media, owners of media companies, and even the general public, fear to be counted as speaking out. We have, I think, fear for people to assemble and protest, worried about maybe Donald Trump invoking the Insurrection Act, and you know, what kind of things might come of that. So yes, there's fear in the marketplace right now.
Who is more afraid and who is less afraid? Are there people who are very afraid, or the people who are not afraid at all?
Well, I'd say, I don't know if it's fear. I think there's people that want to hang on to Donald Trump's coattails and make a few bucks. So those like Jeff Bezos, the LA Times, yes, they fall in line and thinking, how can I enhance my revenue? How can I handle or enhance my government contracts? And I'm thinking of Jeff Bezos on this one, with his rocket company. So is it fear? No, I think we just want to be the chosen few. There they were during the inauguration, right in the front row. That tells you something. I think initially they were afraid, but now I think they're taking over, and who knows, they may be leading Donald Trump down the line. But your question is a good one. What about the average Joe in the United States? And I would say, if you're a MAGA, no, you're certainly emboldened. If you're a critic of Donald Trump and the administration, you're going to think twice before you speak out. We look at the brave souls here on this show right here. And I think each and every one of us maybe have thought in our back mind, what could come of our ability to sit here and speak out and criticize and report things as we see that need to be reported. And so we're all going through that exercise right now, is what could happen to me?
So, Jean, what is there a difference between anticipatory compliance and fear? Is it a combination of power and fear? Talk to us about anticipatory compliance.
Your phrase, I hadn't thought of that. I'm not sure. I think that's a euphemism. Caving before the guillotine comes down, let's put it that way, gives a different spin on it. I would just like to say that fear exists in a spectrum from uncertainty to utter terror. And in between, you get gradations of fear. And it is the political application of intimidation over that spectrum to produce desired results that is typical of an authoritarian system. Everyone exists to a certain degree, from the most visible and powerful to the least of all citizens. And I have read up on this because, as I said, my aunt lived under two fascist regimes in Italy and Germany. And she tells stories about how ordinary people react to it. And then we have, of course, the Milgram experiments on obedience to authority, where we have these contrary findings that people don't obey a malignant authority when they don't agree with the morality of what they're doing. They don't want to do harm to people, but they do it anyway because they give up their moral autonomy and they obey the authority because the authority is in that position itself, which just being an authority in position can be intimidating. If you've ever, imagine yourself meeting the President of the United States. The office itself carries with it such power, and the power to intimidate, coerce, threat, punish is there. I'll give you one example just from today's news. We know that this regime is starting right now out of the gate to try to eliminate people from this country. Their first scapegoats and the people they attack are immigrants, whether they are criminals or non-criminals. Half of them that are being summarily deported right now have not been charged, have not been convicted of a crime. So today, Trump is saying, well, he's having trouble getting these people accepted in their home countries. Maybe we're going to open the Guantanamo Bay prison and incarcerate people in the Guantanamo Bay prison. Think about that as a fear tactic, because what do we associate that with? We associate that with Islamic terrorists that are incarcerated for years and years and then are sent back to places where they don't really belong, or that even those that were tortured there. So it's the use of this rhetoric that conjures up associations in the minds of ordinary people, especially groups that are targeted. The first two groups to be targeted now are immigrants and LGBTQ plus people. They are both expressing fear and experiencing fear.
Manfred, my question to you is, does Trump intend this? Does his administration, does his system of governing include fear as one element of it? Does he want us to be afraid? And if so, why does he want us to be afraid?
Threat was lingering over all of his rallies before the election. And I think he spread fear on a grand scale about what was going to come. And the American people seemed to like it. They were not afraid. They voted for him. Maybe not in an overwhelming majority, but it was enough to make him president. So when you are speaking about fear, you could say it's limited to a minority at this point in the American society, because the majority really celebrates the victory and the emotions of that we characterize as fear that he creates in the people who didn't vote for him. So in that sense, we are. I mean, what I am really lacking at this time in the public is courage. We talked last time about the Episcopalian bishop, the woman in D.C., and now we have Caroline Kennedy as another example of a very courageous woman to come forward. But those are only two illustrations. Where are the others? Why are they not coming forward? I mean, they could not all become arrested and sent to Guantanamo. So there is something, I don't know, there is something lacking, a spine, a political spine that would make people come forward and protest against what we are seeing happening. So for that reason, I think the emphasis on fear may be a little bit misleading. It should be more an emphasis on the absence of courage.
Yeah, you mentioned Caroline Kennedy. What about Josh Green, who flew from Hawaii to Washington to testify against that same guy, Kennedy?
Yes.
He would also be an example of courage, wouldn't he?
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
Hawaii may very well have extreme weather. Hawaii very well may need help in case of wildfires and other climate change
Right.
effects. And Trump may be asked to support it. He's trying to kill FEMA. So it's ultimately going to be in his hands as to whether there's any help coming from Washington. And if he's angry at Josh Green and Hawaii for being too liberal, too democratic, we'll feel it. But I think Green is actually pretty courageous about that.
Right. No, he is. But I mean, you have all of these constituencies that have things to lose. And so I'm not only speaking about individuals like the bishop and like Caroline Kennedy and Josh Green. I'm talking about people who become targets of these policies that he is canceling in all age groups. And I don't see a mass movement of protest so far on the horizon. And I don't understand it in a way. I mean, you had these riots in the 60s and 70s, but there's nothing happening. Part that lost in the election remains silent. Why?
Well, let me ask Tim, because Tim referred to that in his remarks a minute ago. There are people who would like to protest, who might have protested in the first term, but who aren't protesting now. Is that a function of fear? Because remember that Trump has telegraphed the notion of using the American military and the Insurrection Act of the 19th century to deal with that, to address any protest. Is that a function of fear? Is that why they're not going out in the street?
I think partially. Let me just pivot just for a moment and go back to Richard Nixon's enemies list. That was a secret list. No one knew about it until investigative reporters found out about it. I think maybe it was through the Ellsberg notes or not. I can't remember. But Donald Trump's the opposite. He wants you to know who's on his enemies list. And why? Because he wants to instill fear and intimidation. It's not the fear of the known, it's the fear of the unknown. And when you're a target of retribution from the most powerful person in the world, that seems to have some type of psychological effect. But even for to go to Manfred's point, even for the courageous, sometimes it's not your evaluation of yourself. Sometimes you're thinking, well, what could be done to my family? How will my actions to stand tall and stand up impact those that I love or acquaintances or friends? This is the power of fear, is to have the imagination take you to places that maybe won't even be visited by the federal government. But your mind takes you there. You imagine the worst case scenarios. And that has a very, very impactful effect on those who wish to stand up and protest.
Gene, what are the weapons that Trump could use to attack people who speak against him? What are the things that come to mind? Tim mentioned that you could imagine all kinds of horrible things that could happen to you. What are those things?
Each of us has our own list, right?
Maslow.
Yes. But in general, Fear is a function of a fascist regime. And I'm not using that word politically or loosely or as an epithet. I'm using fascism in the scholarly sense of other instances in human history and in as the subject of such experiments as the Milgram experiment and the Zimbardo experience to find out how populations are expected to respond when a fascist regime comes into power. And that's what I'm looking at right now. And what I'm sensing is not that there isn't a protest or a will to protest, but rather that people are slowly kind of strengthening themselves and figuring out exactly what they in particular are going to do and who they are going to align with. This election does not represent 50% of the electorate supporting Donald Trump. If you take the 47% of the entire vote that he got in order to win the Electoral College, and you then apply that to the number of voters who actually voted, let's say it was as high as 65%, and you take 47% of 65%, you come up with something like 33 or 34%, which is exactly what his base amounts to. That leaves 60% of the electorate who are not necessarily in favor of him, plus the fact that we have had reporters telling us that people are actually responding negatively to a couple of his initiatives, and he's rolling a few of them back. So we have something that conforms to the Milgram experiment, which said 65% of his people on average would obey authority, whether they agreed with it or not, and 35% will not. So we have this 35% that support Trump and even a 65% that don't, but we can expect half of that 65% to find some kind of oppositional format for themselves. In fact, it's starting to happen now. Rachel Maddow's come back. MSNBC is acting in the moment as an oppositional outlet for news, in opposition, say, to something like Newsmax, which is like a Trumpian megaphone. And we're actually seeing Invisible becoming more popular and people meeting at the local level. Indivisible operates at the local level, but it's a national network and can be a very effective one. Governors are speaking out. The states are divided, red and blue. Tim Walz last night was gave an interview in which he was very critical of what is happening, and it was a kind of a call to arms. Individuals who are impacted, who are celebrities like Jim Acosta, are going online before they leave their companies and explaining to the American people, and his message was quite clear: don't be afraid.
You think that's having an effect, Jane? You think people should be less afraid when they see stand-ups like that and people acting in a courageous manner? Does that affect you? Does it affect the people you're close with, your family? Do they become less afraid?
What I'm finding is that there are three human biological responses to fear. Maybe there's a fourth one I'm not thinking of. You can flee, you can fight, or you can freeze. What happened after the election is people froze. So many people that I'm in contact with, and I don't limit myself to an echo chamber because I'm a scholar, I have to read all signs. They just turned off their sets. They turned off all their devices. They don't want to listen to programs like this. In fact, my son came to visit me for 6 days. I couldn't even talk to him. I couldn't say the words because he is trying to recompose himself. And he's an activist, and he will find a way to act, and he's a lawyer, and he will find a way to use his skills that he has. Every person who is committed to a democracy will find a way.
Manfred, it is relevant to compare what's happening now with what happened in Germany. I mean, I do, and you haven't been all that excited about making the comparison, but seems to me we need to make that comparison. And there was certainly fear in Germany. I just wonder if you see a comparison on what Hitler was doing and what Stalin was doing too, by the way, and what Putin is doing now in terms of getting control over public thought, getting control over the government by making people afraid. And I guess the question is, let's assume that the courageous people in our community aren't all that courageous, and they really can't stand up against an increase in the attack and the threat, and they become afraid. They become uniformly afraid. What's the comparison there? What do they do? For example, if you were Jewish in Germany in the 30s, there was a demarcation point. Up to a point, you could reject the fear. You could be courageous. You could attach yourself to the courageous people in the community and not worry about it, not turn on the radio, whatever. But after a certain point, when you saw your friends and family being deported to prison and death camps, then you got afraid. But maybe then it was too late. So in terms of action on the fear, where is that break point here? There are some people right now who are thinking about leaving. There was an article in the I think it was the Post a few days ago about the go bag. A lot of people are threatened. They are afraid. They pack a go bag, and a go bag lets you escape. You can go some other place, some other country quickly if you have a go bag. Where's the demarcation? And should we be worried about that?
At this point, I am nervous about what is going to happen in the elections in Germany next month, because you have there the right-wing party, the AfD, rising, being around 20%, and they will not come to power. But the question is, with which party will the Christian Democrats and the candidate Merz, who will become chancellor, form a coalition? He has to form a coalition because the Christian Democrats will not get the majority. And you had today in the German parliament a resolution passed with a majority being all Christian Democratic members and members of the AfD. So what you have there, a month before the election, you have the possibility that you will get in Germany what you got in Italy, and what you get in Austria, a coalition between the conservatives and the right-wing party. So it's not only the 1930s we should be looking to. We should be looking to the contemporary political scene, which is comparable to what we have in the United States. Remember, I bet before the election that there are too many intelligent Americans, they wouldn't vote for Trump. I lost this bet. But I think now maybe the Germans prove that they are not as stupid as the Americans, contemporary Germans. And I'm not so sure whether I want to bet that is true. It may be that they are as stupid because stupidity is a universal category that we always underestimate. Not only, in Germany and the United States, but in every part of not only the Western world, but other parts of the world as well. So for that reason, this comparison that you are always, and Jean are always pointing to, Nazi Germany, may not be a good illustration to introduce when we are talking about this question. And I am, I'm not sure whether there will be, if the AfD, if the Christian Democrats accept the votes of the AfD for what they want to pass, I think Friday, an immigration law, an anti-immigration law, whether the public will be protest I mean, at this point, it seems to be that they will, but I don't know how that will. You have mass demonstrations in Germany, against the FED, hundreds of thousands of people, but whether that will translate in anti-FD votes, I don't know. It may translate into positive votes, so that the people who want, peace and order will vote for the FD because they feel they will, since Musk is always telling them, Germans should forget, their past and not becoming informed by the negative aspects of that past. I mean, that guy is crazy.
Well, let me go to Tim on this. Tim, if we had a lot of people concerned about what Trump has been doing. A lot of people are afraid about what Trump has been doing. There is a lot of fear in the country, and even among people who voted for him the last time, because they could be targets to all these initiatives, one way or the other, primarily or secondarily. Do you think that you think that fear is a part of the midterms? You think they will vote against him on the basis of their fear?
I think they'll vote against him based on the economic calamity that will take place between now and 2 years from now. And if you give me a moment also, I'd like to address the comparison of what we are seeing now versus Nazi Germany, perhaps in the mid-1930s or up to 1938 or whatever. Adolf Hitler had something called the brown shirts. And they were openly beating people in the streets, killing people in the streets. We're not seeing that here. That was a real source of intimidation for the German people back in that day, to see people just laying in the streets, horribly beaten or killed. And when there was people being exported out of the country, they were just given their marching papers to get out. That meant they had to sell their assets on pennies on the Reichsmark. Liquidate everything just to get out of the country. Unfortunately, they went to Poland and then were later, incarcerated and killed. So when we talk about fear, it's infectious, isn't it?
You haven't mentioned, the insurrection defendants who were in jail, 1,600 of them, being released summarily. Some of them dangerous, violent felons, armed, dangerous, violent felons, and they're the spear, if you will, of the base.
Right.
So if he does stochastic remarks, those guys are likely to listen and hear and act.
I say fear is a two-way street because remember, all those convictions really send a message to the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, all those groups, violent groups, that they better think twice before they take up arms and do such things as January 6th. Not until Donald Trump just gave them a get-out-of-jail-free card pass were they thinking about doing something as stupid as January 6th. That was the government's way of saying, or the justice system's way of saying, these are the consequences you will receive should you do such actions. So that was a point of fear. But you're right, Donald Trump uses stochastic language to imply things that he won't say explicitly, to let the imagination run wild and let them create their own fear. When Donald Trump said, "I'll be a dictator for a day," a lot of people know what the connotative meaning of dictator means. And what comes to mind for a lot of folks, and myself included, is, could I be rounded up, incarcerated, never to be seen again? So, these images of language and how powerful it is creates all sorts of imagery for people. And dictator certainly is one of those words that has a very strong connotative meaning to everyone.
Gene, I'm thinking of Anne Applebaum, who was helpful in having us understand what fear meant when the Russians took over East Germany and created officials who were absolutely loyal to the communist state, the Soviet state. It seems to me that fear among them, and fear was, she wrote about this in the Atlantic in a very interesting article. That fear, changed the government. It changed East Germany. It was an important element in the Russian playbook. Now we have people who are afraid, and we talk about how Congress is essentially useless because they don't want to oppose him. A lot of business executives are useless because they don't want to oppose him. The country is dividing on that issue, and it seems to me that the liberal side of it is losing. But in any event, are we following the same track that Anne Applebaum was talking about? And what are the indications of that?
Well, I'd like to back up a little bit and talk about what we mean as historians when we say comparison. It's a methodology. The comparative method is used in this social science, human science of history and history of ideologies, I'll say. And what's becoming apparent for me with the Trump administration is at this second administration, an ideology that unites his movement is becoming more visible and apparent. And that ideology is a combination of his religious base that wants to reinstate American fundamentalist interpretation of the Christian Bible concerning authorities, tiered authorities, whom you should obey and who has domination over the other, particularly in the family, where the father has domination over the wife has domination over the children, and God has domination over everyone, including the state. So that this base of, I would call radical fundamentalist Christianity is part now of the MAGA ideology. Also part of the ideology is entrepreneurship. Out of the great technical revolution in California, where we're seeing the broligarchy, as they call it, the bros, like Elon Musk, who comes out of South Africa, let's remember that, going to Germany before the critical elections where the right wing may prevail, AfD, Alternative for Germany, and in a sense, expanding the Trump ideology and finding common cause with right-wing movements, particularly in Germany, and trying to influence their elections. So when Trump can be a leader internationally as well as nationally. We're looking at types of behaviors in regimes like Germany in 1930s, Mussolini in the 1920s and 30s, America today, and we're looking for specific things. We're not doing one-to-one comparison with the brown shirts in the streets bashing heads or Kristallnacht. We're not expecting any of that. We are looking at groups being targeted as not as individuals, but where they are dehumanized. Immigrants are being dehumanized, and LGBTQ people are being dehumanized. Women are being dehumanized. That is a warning sign, an alarming sign. This thing will not slow down unless there is opposition.
Manfred, Jean pointed out you can fight, you can flee, or you can freeze. And we have people in all those three camps right now. But make a prediction for me and assume that Trump is going to get worse about this. He is going to do showcase, and he is going to do things in the showcase, stochastic remarks that are calculated to make us afraid. So which way is it going to go? And which way should I go and you go and all of us go? Should we go to fight, that is oppose? Should we go to leave town, leave the country? Or should we freeze and wait till it's all over, like Rip Van Winkle? So which way do you think it's going to go? I know I'm asking for a prediction, but maybe you can help us with that.
No, I'm not going to predict. I'm not. I was not very good about that before, and I will not try now a second time because I lost. Look, first, Tim, what you were saying about the brown shirts, the violence in German streets after January 30th, 1933 was not the way you just described it. You had violence, you had battles between the Nazis, the stormtroopers, and the the stormtroopers, and the communists. But when they had rounded up thousands of communists, and then all of the social democratic politicians had left the country, they didn't go to Poland, they went to France, and then to England, and then to the United States. Then, you have this movement, this mass movement of approval of the Nazi regime. But it was not bloody violence in the streets. The Kristallnacht 38 is the beginning of, in a way, you could say, the violence that becomes then represented by what was commemorated on the 27th of this month, the Auschwitz, the liberation of Auschwitz, the camp by the Soviet troops. When I'm looking at Germany today, a month before the election, what I find interesting is you still have the political opposition functioning. You have tens of thousands of Germans demonstrating in the streets against the AfD. Now, whether that will be enough, I don't know. But I mean, you don't have these mass demonstrations in the United States at this point. After him having taken over, after him making all of these crazy decisions that we are watching day after day, and it will get worse. If Kennedy and Gabbard and all of the other lunatics become approved, if you get this loony cabinet of his put together, and they will have the power. Jean was right. You have the Christian fundamentalist influence. The press speaker of Trump, she has this big cross hanging beneath. I mean, on her under her skin, under her chin. It's really, I've never seen that, prominent cross. People before in public, by public officials. So that is, I think, a way to always to pacify people. But I am stunned by the absence now of protests, organized or not organized, in the United States.
Can I just mention, we've already seen examples of the national Christians interceding and using the rationale on some horrific acts through the Trump first administration. Yes. Just real quickly, remember when children are being separated from their parents at the southern border, then Attorney Jeff Sessions said, and he quoted, the rationale came from Romans 13. What's Romans 13? The submission to submit to the government authorities.
Right.
So the Christian, this national Christian movement is not just happening right this second. We already saw it in play in the first administration.
Okay, well, I'd like to go around the table for final thoughts, but Tim, I'd like you to include in your final thoughts the fact that parents are taking kids out of school. They're afraid that immigration is going to show up when they come to pick up their kids from school. There've been articles about that. They're terrified of being caught in the dragnet. And the dragnet, increases, and you see it happening for one group. You think maybe it'll happen for me. You think maybe there'll be, this kind of scapegoat thing, the anti-Semitic thing, the anti-Asian thing, the anti-Black thing. That one group gets caught up in moves against another group. People get depressed, and I think there's that element in our discussion here today. They get depressed, worrying. Fear makes you worry and lay awake at night and so forth, and lay awake during the day, and you try to slow down your exposure. So does that affect our economy? Will we see people, not sending their kids to school, not going to work, not going out to avoid the risk? Will we see that? But then I'd like your final thoughts too.
Yeah, I think you're already seeing it. Various jurisdictions are saying people aren't showing up to work. We have, a decline in student attendance. Why would you not? So yeah, I think they'll become the silent, not seen part of the economy, or not be part of the economy at all. And of course, that has a huge revenue loss, because whether or not they're the recipients of Social Security or Medicare, they certainly paid into the system if they were employed. So if they're no longer working, you can expect that revenue drop as well. So yes, it will have an impact on the economy, and I think it's already happening. And as far as my final thoughts, fear is one of Maslow's hierarchy of things that humans have to deal with. And it's very effective. And it's in every dictator's playbook, other than controlling the media and the message of the media, putting out signals that you too could be part of my enemies list. And you too may be the recipient of a hard life ahead. So, if you really want to play smart, keep your mouth shut, keep your head down, and do as you're told. And I think Donald Trump is moving in that direction. He already has with his enemies list that he's broadcasted. And I think that goes a lot further in the next 4 years.
Jean, your final thoughts?
I would say that we're in the early stages. I'm going to expect increasing polarization between red states and blue states, even movement of individuals from red states to blue states and vice versa. On the red spectrum, people see Trump as a decision maker. They are hungry for people to make decisions. Some of these individuals have been left behind by Washington for way too many years. So they're looking at Trump as a peacemaker. He said he doesn't want wars. And the price of that for them, of decision-making and peacemaking, they're willing to give up a lot of their personal freedom, and also to ignore those who are oppressed, because we do have oppression starting now. The fact that there aren't people in the streets doesn't necessarily mean there is no opposition. I see signs of opposition. The question is, what will make people do good things? What will make people cling to their own moral autonomy in the face of overwhelming authority? This will not look like Nazi Germany or Italy. It is American fascism. It grows. It's a native growth that has been incipient for decades, and I've studied it. And unfortunately, it has come to power, and is now our system is being tested. And we will see what happens in the midterms, and we will see what happens in the media, and we will see what happens with the bulk of the American electorate, whether they can be a curb and a prohibition on some of these extremists like Stephen Miller that are going full bore toward oppressing and harming other people.
Okay, Manfred, you're last up here.
It's ironic. You could almost anticipate, or not only anticipate, welcome Trump's really crazy economic policies, raising tariffs, to become reality, because they will create inflation. They will create all kinds of problems for ordinary Americans who will live under those conditions. But you see, the arrests of the migrants, this depletion of the workforce will grow. I mean, go through Honolulu, see everywhere the hire signs. You have already a problem now, and that will get worse in all kinds of institutions. So in that sense, you could say one should really support all of these radical measures, because they will contribute to the downfall of the Trump syndrome in the midterms.
Okay. Well, I want to add one point. We need to follow all the things he's doing and see it, and the threats he is making, and see it through the lens of what fear it creates. But I want to add that it's not only in the US. He's creating fear elsewhere, in Europe, in Latin America, in Canada, Mexico, and Colombia most recently. And people are afraid around the world of this guy's unpredictability and his mean spirit and his power. So we here at Think Tech, we need to examine what he's doing. We need to keep tabs on that. And we need to examine how we, all of us, can respond and resist his efforts to do that. Otherwise, I fear that we will have a fascism, and the harder he pushes, the faster it'll be. Anyway, thank you very much. Co-host Tim Apicella, esteemed guests, Gene Rosenfeld and Manfred Henningsen. Appreciate your participation in this conversation. We'll see you again next week. Aloha.
Aloha.